The sound was faint at first, a low chuckle rolling out from the bench like thunder disguised as humor. Judge William Alsup leaned back, eyes narrowed with the quiet confidence of someone who believed the moment was already his. His laughter echoed through the chamber, each note a dismissal, each pause a reminder of who held the gavel. The room stiffened, reporters froze, and at the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, her silence sharper than any word. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a statement. A message that said your arguments are trivial, your presence insignificant, your fight unwinnable. For a heartbeat, it seemed as if the centuries-old weight of authority had crushed the air itself. But something stirred. In Jasmine's eyes there was no defeat, only fire. The clash unfolding was bigger than a courtroom skirmish. It was the eternal battle of power versus principle, arrogance versus dignity. Every person watching could feel it. Deep in their chests, something was about to break. And then, as America held its breath, the story twisted. Because what happened next no one expected. The laughter might have lasted only seconds, but its sting lingered like smoke after a fire. Outside those walls, people scrolling through their feeds saw the clip within minutes. The judge's smirk, his dismissive chuckle, it spread across timelines like wildfire to many. It wasn't just a courtroom moment, it was a mirror reflecting a deeper question: who gets to be heard in America and who gets laughed out of the room? Jasmine Crockett knew exactly what was at stake. She wasn't standing there as just another attorney or legislator. She was standing as the voice of every immigrant told to wait their turn, every working mother dismissed as too emotional, every young activist mocked for not knowing how the world works. When Alsup laughed, it wasn't only at her, it was at the millions she represented. This wasn't about procedure, it was about dignity. It was about whether truth could survive the sneer of power. And in that instant, the divide was crystal clear. One man sat cloaked in robes, convinced the weight of his title made him untouchable. Opposite him stood a woman carrying the weight of stories, sacrifices, and struggles much older than the courtroom itself. And yet the balance was about to shift. Because Jasmine's silence was not submission, it was preparation, the spark before the blaze. What came next would flip the script and leave the entire room reeling. Alsup had worn the robe longer than most could remember, a fixture of the federal courts whose presence alone could silence a room. Decades in power had rendered him untouchable in his own mind. Precedent, procedure, and protocol bent around him as if the law itself deferred to his authority to him. Rules were tools, not obligations, and the finer points of justice were often measured by his convenience. From the earliest days of his career, Alsup's intellect had been both his shield and his sword. He wielded sarcasm like a scalpel, dissecting arguments with a precision that left others shivering under the weight of their own missteps. Laughter was another instrument in his arsenal, carefully timed, sharp, and unrelenting. To him, laughter was a weapon, a way to diminish those who dared to challenge authority, to remind colleagues and litigants alike that he alone held the power to confer worth. Beneath this polished exterior, arrogance had grown into a mask. He had learned long ago that charm could coax loyalty, but fear commanded respect. He cultivated both with meticulous care. His condescension was subtle, almost invisible to those desperate for approval, yet unmistakable to anyone with the nerve to stand against him. Even seasoned lawyers, when confronted with his smirk, felt a pang of self-doubt, questioning not just their arguments but their place in the legal hierarchy. Yet Alsup's history was not without cracks. Decisions once heralded as genius now seemed tinged with hubris. Mentorship soured, not from lack of knowledge but from his inability to temper ego with empathy. Friends grew distant, and rivals learned to mask their triumphs, knowing that his sharp tongue could turn even success into humiliation. Still, the judge's gaze rarely wavered. He was a man convinced that his position was a summit, that no one could scale the heights he had claimed. The very arrogance that had propelled him forward now threatened to blind him. Hints of miscalculation flickered in the corners of courtrooms, glimpses of a man too accustomed to command. The subtle fractures were invisible to most, but those patient enough to observe could see the faint outlines of a fall yet to come. In Alsup's world, power was law, and law was his dominion. But dominions, no matter how fortified, have weaknesses, and sometimes the very weapons one uses to conquer become the instruments of one's own undoing. Jasmine Crockett had learned early that the world was rarely fair. Born into a neighborhood where voices were often ignored, she discovered quickly that silence was the currency of the powerless. From the first day she argued in a high school debate, she understood that words could be weapons, that conviction could bend perception, and that truth, though fragile, demanded courage to be heard. Her path to law was neither linear nor easy. Scholarships, late nights, and relentless self-discipline became her companions, forging a resolve that refused compromise. Even in classrooms crowded with privilege, Jasmine's authenticity set her apart. She listened more than she spoke, observing the unspoken injustices around her, and then she struck in essays, in arguments, in the courtroom with clarity that left no room for doubt. Her ascent was fueled by grit, yes, but also by a deeper purpose. She was not fighting for accolades, she was fighting for the unheard. In her early cases, she discovered the emotional core of her mission. A single mother, wrongly accused, a teenager denied opportunity, a community crushed under bureaucracy. Each client became more than a file. They were echoes of generations silenced. For Jasmine, victory was never just legal, it was moral. Each triumph, each precedent set was a step toward a world where justice did not favor the powerful. Friends and mentors recognized in her a rare combination of brilliance and empathy. Yet Jasmine never forgot the stakes. Every late night, every setback only sharpened her determination. She carried the weight of those who came before her, whose voices had been muted, whose struggles had been rendered invisible. In court, she did not merely advocate for law, she bore witness to history, weaving the stories of the oppressed into the fabric of justice. And now, after years of navigating a system designed to intimidate and marginalize, Jasmine faced a challenge unlike any before. She would confront a man whose power had been absolute for decades, whose smirk had silenced the confident and crushed the uncertain. But Jasmine's fire was not just her own. It was the culmination of countless silenced voices, a collective roar that refused to be ignored. The courtroom air was thick with expectation, the kind that pressed against the skin and made every movement feel heavier. Alsup sat behind the bench like a predator surveying territory he believed belonged solely to him. His smirk was constant, a quiet taunt that whispered of years spent eroding confidence in those who dared oppose him. Fingers tapped rhythmically against the wood, subtle interruptions punctuated his dismissive nods, and every gesture, no matter how slight, was loaded with derision. Jasmine Crockett stood her ground. Her voice was steady, measured, even as the room seemed to tilt in favor of the judge's authority. She met each interruption with clarity, refusing to let the undercurrent of condescension dictate the pace of her argument. Every attempt to destabilize her, the clipped laughter, the faint roll of his eyes, the pointed sighs, was met with resolve. She had faced long odds before, and she knew the power of persistence, of truth spoken without hesitation. The narrator could almost see the invisible battle lines forming. Alsup wielding experience and ego like weapons, Jasmine countering with precision and unyielding courage. Every laugh was meant to break her resolve, every smirk designed to make her question the worth of her words, but every laugh only fueled her determination. With each dismissal, she leaned more into her purpose, letting her commitment to justice become her armor. Spectators shifted in their seats, sensing the tension spiraling beyond normal court procedure. It was no longer a debate, it was a collision of wills, the old guard versus the rising force unafraid of challenge. Jasmine's arguments had a rhythm, a force that even Alsup could not entirely suppress. Yet he persisted, the mask of authority unbroken, a storm barely contained behind carefully chosen words and sharpened gestures. The courtroom had grown unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that stretches long enough to make every heartbeat audible. Alsup's smirk lingered like a shadow, a mask of confidence he had worn for decades. He leaned back, confident that the rhythm of his interruptions and veiled derision had already begun to unravel Jasmine's composure. But Jasmine Crockett was unshakable. She inhaled slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle around her like a tangible pressure. Every pair of eyes in the room, every camera lens capturing the exchange, felt the tension coil tighter, ready to spring. Then with deliberate clarity, she spoke, not a rush, not a stammer, but a measured strike that cut through the silence like a blade. Her words were precise, each one loaded with authority and conviction. She dismantled Alsup's arguments point by point, exposing assumptions that had gone unquestioned for decades. Each pause she allowed between sentences was a beat for the room to catch up, a moment for the weight of her insight to sink in. Every gesture, every carefully enunciated phrase, carried the force of experience, empathy, and unyielding moral clarity. The first reactions were subtle, a barely audible gasp from the back row, a murmured agreement from a clerk, the faint shuffle of a pen across a notepad. Then, as her argument sharpened to its crescendo, the courtroom seemed to awaken. Applause, tentative at first, began to ripple, growing with each undeniable point. Cameras swiveled, reporters leaned forward, and outside the room, social media lit up with live feeds, hashtags exploding with praise for the attorney who refused to bend. Alsup's smirk faltered. A twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of impatience in his eyes. Laughter that had once carried the weight of authority now sounded hollow, almost desperate. The mask of composure cracked, revealing the raw frustration beneath. He tried to reclaim control, his words sharper, faster, yet uneven, each attempt only highlighting the widening gap between his confidence and the reality of Jasmine's mastery. She didn't flinch. Each retort landed with precision, each point a reminder that authority is earned, not assumed. And as her final statement echoed through the room, there was no need for her to raise her voice. The impact was undeniable. The courtroom had shifted. Allies of the powerless, the silenced, the overlooked, felt their voices amplified through her courage. Alsup leaned back, visibly shaken, the veneer of invincibility eroding. He had underestimated her, underestimated the fire that came from not just intellect but lived experience, relentless perseverance, and the moral certainty of fighting for those without a voice. But the shockwaves didn't stop in that courtroom. By the time the gavel fell, the courtroom's tension had already spilled into the world outside. Smartphones had captured every pivot, every piercing rebuttal, every moment of Alsup's faltering composure. Within hours, clips of Jasmine Crockett's counterattack dominated feeds across platforms. Hashtags surged, #Crockett strikes, #voice of dignity, #courtroom moment, trending not just in major cities but in small towns that had long felt invisible to the justice system. Memes surfaced, some humorous, some reverent, all amplifying the spectacle of a woman who had refused to be intimidated. Influencers dissected her precision, analysts praised her poise, and celebrities shared the clips, each post carrying its own endorsement of courage and truth. Commentators on national networks replayed her statements repeatedly, framing them as a masterclass in advocacy. The dichotomy was undeniable. Jasmine became the voice of dignity, unwavering and eloquent. Alsup, once untouchable, was reframed as the face of arrogance, a symbol of power confronted and unsettled. The ripple effect extended far beyond the courtroom. Law students debated her strategy, activists cited her words as rallying cries, and ordinary citizens felt a surge of validation, a recognition that someone in power could be held accountable without compromise. Her victory was more than a legal point. It became a statement, a beacon for those who had been ignored, dismissed, or silenced for too long. Across social media and news cycles, commentary turned from admiration to cultural reflection. Opinion pieces examined the systemic barriers she had faced, drawing parallels to larger struggles for equity and justice. Podcasts invited her to speak, capturing not only her intellect but the fire that fueled it. In living rooms, offices, and classrooms, conversations shifted. People weren't just watching a courtroom drama, they were witnessing a paradigm shift, a tangible moment when courage, clarity, and moral authority had collided with entrenched arrogance. And while Alsup retreated into the confines of his chambers, his reputation subtly cracking under scrutiny, Jasmine emerged as more than a lawyer in a single case. She became a national symbol, proof that integrity and tenacity could challenge and even redefine the landscape of power. The world had taken notice, and it was only the beginning. In the days that followed the courtroom clash, Jasmine Crockett did not revel in triumph. She spoke with measured humility, framing the confrontation not as a personal victory but as a universal truth. Dignity outshines mockery, and persistence can pierce even the most fortified arrogance. Interviews, speeches, and panels carried her message with clarity and grace. She reminded the nation that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. "When power laughs at truth," she said in one address, "it exposes its own weakness." Those words reverberated far beyond legal circles, becoming a mantra for anyone who had ever felt diminished by authority. People saw in her example that integrity need not cower in the face of intimidation, that one voice, resolute and principled, could ignite a chorus demanding accountability and justice. Alsup's influence, once untouchable, waned under the light of scrutiny and public awareness. His laughter, once a weapon, now seemed hollow, a reminder that authority built on fear cannot withstand transparency or moral clarity. Meanwhile, Jasmine's rise inspired a generation to reconsider the meaning of leadership not as a title or position, but as the capacity to stand firm when stakes are high and stakes are shared. The narrative that emerged was simple yet profound. Democracy is sustained when individuals refuse to bow to intimidation, when they speak for those who cannot, and when they hold the powerful accountable with both courage and compassion. Jasmine's actions, amplified by modern media and the collective conscience of society, demonstrated that influence is earned through integrity, not inherited through hierarchy. Across communities, her example sparked conversations, advocacy, and renewed commitment to justice. Courage, it seemed, was contagious. Teachers used her story to inspire students, lawyers cited her approach in courtrooms, and ordinary citizens found the confidence to speak truth in small but meaningful ways. In every corner where silence had once prevailed, there was now possibility, a reminder that one steadfast voice can alter the course of many. In the end, the lesson was clear. When dignity confronts derision, and when conviction meets arrogance, the moral arc bends not toward fear but toward justice. Jasmine Crockett had shown the world that courage, amplified by principle, can illuminate the path forward, a path where truth and integrity endure, no matter how powerful the opposition. Justice laughed, but Jasmine roared back, and America listened. In that moment, a single courtroom became a stage for a larger truth. Arrogance can mock, intimidate, and dominate, but it cannot withstand clarity, courage, and unwavering principle. Jasmine Crockett's voice reminded the nation that dignity and persistence are not just personal virtues, they are instruments of societal change. Her triumph was not simply legal, it was moral. When power seeks to belittle truth, it exposes its own fragility. When a steadfast voice refuses to back down, it inspires millions to reclaim their own. The lesson is clear. Courage, grounded in integrity, has the power to bend the arc of justice toward fairness and accountability. If you believe in voices like Jasmine's, share this, subscribe, and keep the movement alive. Let her example remind us all that silence is optional, fear is temporary, and truth, when championed, resonates far beyond any single courtroom. Together we can ensure that justice is not just an ideal, but a living, breathing force, amplified by every person willing to speak up, stand firm, and roar when the world needs it most.